Welcome to the history section. We are examining a tumultuous period in 10th century history, specifically focusing on the Byzantine Empire's struggle for survival.
And at the same time, the concurrent, brutal state-building process that was underway in the emerging power of the Kievan Rus.
This 50-year span from the 940s to the 980s is just characterized by extreme political volatility.
Absolutely. You see multiple callous coups in Constantinople and
Yeah.
in the north, a really dramatic, forced cultural transformation.
It feels like two vastly different political structures interacting under immense pressure.
It is. On one side, you have the highly sophisticated, almost labyrinthine bureaucracy of Byzantium, which, for all its complexity, failed to maintain internal peace.
And on the other,
A group of powerful, ambitious, and often half-wild warriors transforming themselves into a major geopolitical player.
so we should begin our discussion in Constantinople with the reign of Romanos Lecapenus.
He managed to secure the empire externally for over 20 years, which is a remarkable achievement.
Especially given the constant dual-front pressures on the Byzantine state.
His tenure was a masterclass in sustained, exhausting geopolitical management. The players weren't just threats. They were annual existential demands.
On their military and their fiscal resources.
Exactly. To the east, the conflict was non-negotiable. They were engaged in yearly campaigns against these ambitious emirs who had carved out territories from the dissolving former Abbasid Caliphate.
And failure there meant losing vital territory.
Productive, defensible territory. It was something they simply couldn't afford.
And then the western and northern flanks required a different kind of engagement, didn't they? Perhaps more insidious.
Right. It was a triangle of unpredictable powers, the Rus, the Bulgarians, and the Magyars.
They weren't always seeking to conquer, but constantly to extract wealth.
That's correct. These powers acted like a persistent, slow-burning fever for the empire. Romanos had to employ a complex blend of diplomacy, intimidation, and, well, fiscal draining.
So he would negotiate treaties to buy some temporary peace.
Or issue threats backed by the fearsome reputation of the Byzantine military. And, frequently, he just resorted to paying substantial tribute.
It was, you could say, cold, hard cash diplomacy.
Just designed to keep their nomadic armies and raiding parties from approaching the walls of Constantinople. Romanos' 20 years were spent successfully diverting these external pressures.
And yet, despite that external stability, the political structure Romanos himself built created the conditions for his own downfall.
It did. By the time he reached the age of 74, the throne room was dangerously crowded.
With 5 emperors.
Romanos' entire strategy was based on dynastic ambition and, frankly, insecurity. He was a usurper who seized the throne, and he desperately needed to legitimize his line, the Lecapenus family.
Over the established and rightful Macedonian dynasty.
His solution was saturation. He crowned his 2 biological sons, Stephen and Constantine Lecapenus, and his oldest grandson as co-emperors.
The 5th emperor was the critical pawn, Constantine Porphyrogenitus.
Exactly. Constantine, the legitimate heir, was married to Romanos' own daughter, Elena.
Why keep him on the throne? Why not just exile him?
Because Constantine Porphyrogenitus provided a necessary layer of legitimacy. The term Porphyrogenitus, born in the purple, signaled he was born while his father was reigning emperor. It was an ancient sign of undisputed right.
So by keeping Constantine on the throne, even if minimized, Romanos was leveraging that legitimacy.
While attempting to ensure that when the time came, the power would flow to his Lecapenus sons, who were already positioned as co-emperors. It was an attempted political merger.
But the strategy of overcrowding the throne, it often backfires.
Precisely. The ambition he fostered in his sons outpaced the natural course of events. They were impatient,
They had the title, but not the actual power.
which led directly to the first coup of 944. Romanos' 2 sons, Stephen and Constantine Lecapenus, decided waiting was no longer necessary.
How was the coup executed?
They mobilized their personal bodyguards. This really highlights the decentralized nature of palace security. Loyalties are often personal, not institutional.
And they just seized their elderly father.
A man of 74. They removed him from the palace and, without fanfare, exiled him to a monastery on the desolate island of Prote in the Sea of Marmara. It was a swift, clean political murder, just disguised as piety.
And for a short period, the Lecapenus brothers assumed they had successfully taken control.
They did. But they fundamentally miscalculated the will and ambition of a woman who had been watching Byzantine politics for nearly 3 decades.
Their own sister, Elena Lecapenus.
They severely underestimated her. Elena had been married to the pliable, rather unassertive Constantine Porphyrogenitus for 26 years, since she was just 9. She knew her husband would never actively grab the crown.
But now that her father was removed, she refused to stand aside.
She refused to share the imperial title with her 2 usurping brothers. The power she saw within reach was not going to be split 3 ways.
So Elena became the true mastermind of the counter-coup.
She had to be. She couldn't seize power herself, but she had control over the one person whose claim was fundamentally legitimate.
Her husband.
The symbol of continuity. That was the strategic key. Elena convinced Constantine to authorize the arrest. She orchestrated the second coup with stunning speed.
And it was executed during a dinner.
As her 2 brothers and their grandson sat down to eat, the royal guards swept in and arrested all 3 men.
Which provided the necessary legal cover, even if the impetus came from her.
It did. The result was a dramatic, almost poetic justice. All 3 Lecapenus men were exiled to distant monasteries, suffering the exact same fate they had dealt out to their father just weeks before.
This action catapulted Constantine Porphyrogenitus, who had spent nearly 40 years in the shadows, to the position of sole emperor.
Constantine VII. The Macedonian dynasty, which had been marginalized by Romanos I, was now fully solidified.
And it was all thanks to the machinations of Romanos' own daughter.
It's quite something. Romanos himself died peacefully in his monastery 3 years later. And despite his personal failure, his dynasty did survive through his grandson, the 7-year-old heir to the new emperor.
So, Constantine Porphyrogenitus had successfully navigated the deadly internal politics of the palace. But upon becoming sole emperor, his first action was immediate and external.
Yes, he immediately set about negotiating a new treaty with the Rus.
Which suggests the Rus were now seen as a threat equal to, or perhaps even exceeding, the traditional Eastern enemies.
The immediate focus on the Rus indicates a fundamental geopolitical shift. Byzantium had always faced east, dedicating its most formidable armies to the armies of Islam.
But by the mid-10th century, the Rus had transitioned from occasional raiders to something much more persistent.
And terrifying, a major factor on the northern frontier. They weren't just invaders seeking territory, they were raiders seeking the vast wealth of Constantinople.
To really grasp the magnitude of this threat, we need to look at how the Rus were perceived just decades prior.
The account from the Arab geographer Ibn Fadlan is essential here. Less than 30 years earlier, he provides this vivid and quite unflattering detail.
He famously described the Rus as the dirtiest creatures of God.
And this wasn't just a casual insult. It reflected a fundamental difference in lifestyle and cultural values. He noted they were half wild, always armed, a sign of their transient, constant state of warfare and tattooed from neck to fingertip.
Living in temporary wooden shelters.
The details he provided about their social and ritual habits are what truly shocked the refined Byzantines.
Yes, the paganism and lack of settled structure.
Absolutely. Ibn Fadlan detailed their complete indifference to public modesty, their practice of copulating in public, their sacrifices to strange bloody gods.
But it's the anecdote about hygiene that really defines the cultural contrast.
The shared washing vessel. It highlights a tribal reality entirely alien to the Byzantines, who were obsessed with ritual cleansing.
How did it work?
A single vessel of water would be brought by a slave girl. The master would use it to wash his hands, face, and hair. Then, crucially, before passing the vessel, he would blow his nose and spit directly into the water.
Into the same water.
And that same, now contaminated vessel was then passed sequentially to the next individual, who repeated the exact same process.
Until everyone had used it.
Until every single person in the group had used the same, increasingly foul container. For the Byzantines, this was the height of primitive squalor.
And this cultural profile also suggests a people fundamentally without roots.
Yes, they were purely transactional, focused on trade, never establishing permanent infrastructure like settlements or even burial grounds. Ibn Fadlan confirmed they preferred to cremate their dead.
Which makes the very existence of the 945 treaty under Prince Igor of Kiev so astonishing.
In less than 3 decades, the Rus had moved from a loose collection of trading and raiding bands to possessing the semblance of a central government.
So the Treaty of 945 wasn't just a peace agreement. It was Byzantium's attempt to impose structure and control on this volatile entity.
The primary goal was management, not exclusion. The treaty reaffirmed the earlier 9/11 peace, but introduced specific, strict rules for any engagement within the capital.
For instance, Rus merchants had to be unarmed.
A crucial measure to prevent sudden violence. They were also limited to entering the city in groups of no more than 50.
And the Byzantines used powerful economic incentives.
An elegant solution. If the Rus conducted their business peacefully and returned to Kiev, they would receive a month of free food.
Beyond trade, though, the treaty contained a groundbreaking provision.
This is the most significant aspect. It established sovereign legal rights. The treaty mandated that if a Rus criminal took refuge in the Byzantine Empire, he would be arrested and returned to the Rus, regardless of his protests.
And vice versa.
Exactly. This formalized an early state-level justice system, acknowledging Igor not just as a tribal war leader, but as a ruler capable of administering international law.
And finally, it formalized the strategic military partnership.
Absolutely. The Rus became paid professional mercenaries. He needed formidable shock troops to fight the Bulgarians or the Arabs. He would call upon the Rus.
But even with Igor negotiating like a king, there were signs of residual tribalism.
The research is clear on this. The signatories beneath Igor's name were 50 war leaders, with a mixture of Norse and Slavic names. It shows his authority was still dependent on the consent of a decentralized military aristocracy.
And this limited tribal authority that the treaty revealed proved to be Igor's undoing.
Immediately after securing this major diplomatic victory, his decision to revert to old-style tribal rule led directly to his violent end.
His failure to transition from warlord to administrator was fatal.
He attempted to collect overdue tribute from the Drevlians, a Slavic tribe he had conquered. His methods were purely extractive, highly aggressive.
And the Drevlians captured him.
The manner of his death reflects the utter savagery of these pre-state conflicts. He was tied to 2 bent-over tree trunks, which were then released, tearing him in two. A brutal political message.
The sudden power vacuum was filled by his wife, Olga, who served as regent for their young son, Sviatoslav.
And her initial acts were pure, cold-blooded revenge.
She understood that in this political climate, failure to react decisively would invite immediate collapse.
Her first act was a horrifying demonstration of power. She burned the Drevlian city of Korostan to the ground and oversaw the systematic slaughter of hundreds.
The history describes her using revolting ways.
Burning, transfixing, burying them alive.
Yeah.
This act of disproportionate retribution served notice that the new ruler would tolerate no resistance to Kiev's authority. She transitioned immediately from grieving widow to ruthless warrior queen.
What's truly remarkable is that immediately following this massive act of bloodshed, Olga pivoted from revenge to sophisticated administrative reform.
This pivot is the foundational moment of the Rus state. She began dividing the entire realm into administrative districts, which she called pogosts.
So this replaced the arbitrary, dangerous process of a ruler riding out to forcibly collect tribute.
Instead, each pogost was made responsible for a set, regular tax payment to Kiev. The Drevlians, the very tribe who had killed her husband, were placed under this regulated system.
This change from tribute extraction to standardized taxation fundamentally altered the social contract.
It did. It standardized the revenue stream, making Kiev's finances more predictable, and it stabilized the political relationship by offering the conquered territories a fixed expectation.
It's the first definitive step toward establishing a unified Rus state.
And Olga's final strategic act was to seek international legitimacy. She visited Constantinople in 957, seeking recognition from Emperor Constantine VII.
The visit was a crucial diplomatic gambit. In less than 20 years since Igor's death, the Rus leader was being received as a fellow sovereign.
And Constantine VII was acutely aware of the necessity of impressing and binding this powerful northern neighbor. The Byzantine diplomatic theater was brought to its absolute peak to overwhelm her.
The level of opulence must have been staggering.
The imperial palace was transformed. The floors were reportedly strewn with an aromatic carpet of flowers, roses, ivy, myrtle, rosemary, the walls draped with rich silks.
And the mechanical marvels in the throne room.
The golden toy lions that roared and golden griffins that fluttered in her honor. These were calculated demonstrations of Byzantine technological superiority.
The ultimate goal of this week-long spectacle was not just trade, but spiritual integration.
Yes, culminating in Olga's conversion to Christianity. She agreed to be baptized, recognizing the political and cultural capital that came with it.
And Constantine VII's wife, Elena, served as her godmother.
Which officially welcomed the Kievan Rus leader into the spiritual and therefore political family of Byzantium, a massive diplomatic and cultural victory.
However, the history notes this transformation was partly temporary.
A bit of foreshadowing, yes. Cultural change cannot always be mandated from the top.
That temporary nature manifested clearly in Olga's son. In 963, Sviatoslav took power at age 21, and he immediately rejected the sophisticated Christian faith and state-building his mother had championed.
Sviatoslav was a dramatic throwback, a warrior prince whose entire identity was defined by conquest and paganism.
His response to his mother's urging toward baptism was quite telling.
He refused, stating his retinue would simply laugh at him. His entire focus was military, adhering strictly to heathen usages and behaving like a pre-state tribal chief.
The descriptions of his campaigning life paint him as a near-mythical figure of martial asceticism.
He's described as moving light as a leopard. His methods were entirely unburdened by logistics. He carried neither wagons nor kettles, refused to cook meat.
Instead, he ate thin strips of horse flesh or beef, roasted over coals.
Slept rough, using a horse blanket and a saddle for a pillow. This asceticism was a way of leadership that prioritized mobility and raw fighting power.
And he famously sent messengers ahead to announce his intention to attack other lands.
A very direct, ritualized view of warfare. His early rule was entirely consumed by conflict, fighting the Khazars, Slavs, and the Pechenegs.
While Sviatoslav was campaigning in the north, Constantinople was undergoing another period of internal political weakness.
Yes, Constantine Porphyrogenitus died in his mid-50s, succeeded by his 21-year-old son, Romanos II.
Who was the grandson of the original usurper, Romanos Lecapenus.
And Romanos II was structurally weak. His time was characterized by youthful indulgences fostered by palace courtiers. It created a clear vacuum of authority.
And into this vacuum stepped two incredibly strong figures. His wife, Theophano.
And the general who would come to define the era, Nikephoros Phocas.
Nikephoros Phocas was the indispensable man, a career military officer channeling all his energy into military affairs after swearing an oath of chastity.
His dedication meant that the 4 years of Romanos II's reign, despite the emperor's personal failings, were monumentally successful for Byzantine arms.
Largely thanks to Nikephoros and his nephew, John Tzimiskes.
They executed 2 historic campaigns. First, Nikephoros led the navy in the recapture of Crete, a massive strategic victory.
And second, his army pushed deep into the east, conquering Aleppo.
These victories established Nikephoros as the empire's greatest living military commander, the sole guarantor of stability.
This precarious balance of power was shattered in March 963 when Romanos II died suddenly of a fever.
Leaving behind his 2 toddler sons, Basil II, age 5, and Constantine VIII, age 3, as co-emperors.
Which thrust Romanos' young widow Theophano into the role of regent.
And she was politically compromised. Chroniclers suspected her of poisoning her husband. Facing an uncertain future, she recognized her immediate need for a powerful protector.
And that protector was the returning hero, Nikephoros Phocas.
Theophano immediately sent private offers of alliance to Nikephoros. And his military stature was so enormous that his army, without waiting for imperial authorization, proclaimed him emperor in July.
The transition was conditional, however.
Yes, the Patriarch of Constantinople insisted that Nikephoros swear an oath that he would never harm the 2 rightful heirs, the toddler co-emperors.
Which he did. And then he was crowned Nikephoros II.
But the maneuvering didn't end there. He immediately married Theophano in a matter of weeks.
Which speaks volumes about the political urgency of the union.
It was an entirely pragmatic political alliance. Marrying the Empress Dowager ensured she remained on the throne, that he became the legal stepfather of the heirs, and that he gained immediate access to the palace administration.
And he returned to the battlefield, leaving Theophano alone in the capital.
This separation and her continuing ambition set the stage for the third and most brutal coup.
Nikephoros II defined his rule not as a politician, but as supreme commander. His primary compulsion was not just maintaining borders, but aggressively expanding them.
And this ambition led him to enter into a catastrophic alliance with the ultimate warrior prince, Sviatoslav.
In 968, he hired Sviatoslav and 50,000 Rus mercenaries to fight in a declared war against Bulgaria.
Nikephoros needed the ferocious fighting capacity of the Rus, and Sviatoslav, having just devastated the Khazar Empire, saw Bulgaria as his next conquest.
The problem was that Sviatoslav viewed the contract as an opportunity for self-service, not loyalty.
He launched an attack on Bulgaria so shattering that he seized the entire north of the country for himself. The Bulgarian ruler, Peter I, reportedly died of a stroke.
He had used the Byzantine money and mandate to secure his own territorial gain,
effectively establishing a new, powerful, and hostile entity directly on Byzantium's northern border. and he immediately signaled his hostile intent.
He sent a direct message to Nikephoros Phocas, announcing his intention to march against them and capture their city.
This confirmed Sviatoslav's ethos. A brilliant fighter, but a disastrously unreliable ally.
Tragically for Nikephoros, he never had the chance to deal with this emerging threat.
No. Before he could mobilize against the Rar, he was brutally murdered in the palace.
This was the culmination of rising unpopularity due to the crushing taxes required to fund his endless campaigning.
Combined with the lethal treachery of his wife and chief lieutenant, Theophano and John Zimisces had been conducting an affair, and they saw Nikephoros as an obstacle.
The research provides a vivid, almost unbearable account of the murder.
Nikephoros, adhering to his disciplined soldier's life, habitually slept on the floor of his chamber using a leopard skin.
On the night of December 10th, Theophano let the conspirators in.
The account from Leo the Deacon is graphic. The conspirators rushed in, surrounded the sleeping emperor, and kicked him. When he tried to raise himself, a guard struck him violently with a sword on the brow.
Crying out, "Help me, O Mother of God!" He was dragged across the floor.
And the violence escalated. John Zimisces personally participated. He grabbed the wounded emperor's beard and pulled it mercilessly, while others smashed his jaws with their sword handles, knocking out his teeth.
The final fatal blow was delivered by John Zimisces himself.
He kicked the emperor in the chest and drove his sword straight through the middle of his brain. It was an act of personal, profound savagery.
Despite this horrific regicide, history notes that only Nikephoros and one bodyguard were killed.
And within 7 days, good order and deep quiet prevailed over the people. The public mood had turned against the austere, tax-heavy military ruler.
John Zimisces managed to convince the city and the patriarch to crown him,
But the most immediate political casualty, aside from Nikephoros, was Theophano herself.
who likely expected to remain empress.
A total political miscalculation. John Zimisces recognized that keeping the woman who had helped murder his predecessor would permanently taint his rule.
So he exiled her.
Immediately, to an island in the Sea of Marmara. And to secure his legitimacy, he married one of Constantine Porphyrogennetus's daughters, realigning himself with the legitimate Macedonian dynasty.
John Lecapenus, having swiftly secured his throne, immediately faced the existential threat that Nikephoros had unleashed.
Sviatoslav, allied with Boris II of Bulgaria, advancing on Constantinople.
John understood the severity of the threat.
He was a brilliant strategist himself. He organized a formidable defensive force and marched out to confront them. The armies met at Archidiopolis, about 60 miles west of the capital.
And the Byzantine defense was successful.
The Rus were pushed back, and the Bulgarians retreated. John Zimisces pursued them relentlessly, captured Boris II and his brother, and formally annexed Bulgaria.
Sviatoslav, repelled from Byzantium, was forced to retreat back to Kiev. He met an end that mirrored the savagery of his tribal origins.
He failed to escape the fate of the transient warrior. He was ambushed and assassinated by his longtime enemies, the nomadic Turkish tribe of the Pechenegs.
And the final act of brutality is quite something.
The Pecheneg chief fashioned a gold-overlaid cup out of Sviatoslav's skull, which was then used for his warriors to drink from. A symbolic end to the era of the aggressive, purely pagan tribal chief.
Sviatoslav's death plunged the Rus back into chaos until 980, when his youngest son, Vladimir, ultimately triumphed and became the king of the Rus.
And Vladimir's rise marked the final transition away from the transient warrior alliance. His ultimate goal would not be more raiding, but cementing the Rus state's position on the international stage.
8 years later, in 988, John Zimisces was dead, and the rightful heirs, Basil II and Constantine VIII, were co-rulers. Vladimir negotiated a comprehensive treaty with them.
The terms were a straightforward political bargain. Vladimir would secure lasting peace and supply a continuous stream of soldiers for the Byzantine army.
And in return, he demanded two major concessions.
A marriage alliance to the emperor's sister Anna, and the explicit understanding that he would convert to Christianity.
The marriage to the imperial sister was highly sensitive.
Anna was understandably dismayed. Vladimir was rumored to have over 800 wives and concubines. Basil II had to persuade her, framing the marriage as God's work, since it was conditional upon Vladimir's baptism.
Vladimir submitted, but the research confirms his motivation was primarily strategic.
He was an astute political leader. He viewed monotheistic religion, supported by a structured network of priests and scholars, as the necessary bureaucratic and cultural glue to solidify his authority.
The Russian primary chronicle offers a telling anecdote suggesting Vladimir approached this with a practical assessment of available faiths.
His considerations were remarkably utilitarian. He reportedly investigated Islam, but rejected it when he learned he would have to swear off alcohol. He also disliked the Jewish requirement of circumcision.
Christianity, as presented by Byzantium, offered the necessary structure and legitimacy without demanding extreme cultural sacrifices.
Upon returning to Kiev, Vladimir acted with ruthless efficiency. He ordered the idols overthrown and immediately mandated a mass baptism of his people.
It was framed not as an act of individual faith, but as a top-down state decision.
He sent heralds to proclaim that any inhabitant who did not go to the river for baptism would risk the prince's displeasure. That threat was sufficient motivation.
The description of the mass baptism at the Dnieper River captures the sheer scale of it.
It was a monumental scene. A countless multitude assembled. People entered the water simultaneously, some up to their necks, others to their breasts, adults holding children, while priests offered prayers on the banks.
This one dramatic, compulsory act was intended to wipe out the pagan past.
It was. And he immediately established the necessary infrastructure. He ordered churches built and instituted a parish system.
Crucially, he also prioritized Christian education, taking the children of the best families for book learning.
But this sudden, forced transformation was met with cultural resistance. The Russian primary chronicle captures this by recording the reaction of the mothers of these children.
They wept bitterly.
Mourning the removal of their children for education as if they were mourning the dead. They were not yet strong in the new faith.
Through this strategic and sometimes painful process, Vladimir successfully transformed the volatile warrior alliance of the Rus into a solidified Christian state.
One capable of standing as a full political and military ally to Byzantium and taking its place among the great Western kingdoms.
The story of Byzantium in this period demonstrates the necessity of constant political fluidity.
While the story of the Rus shows that political power, when backed by force, can achieve profound, rapid, and permanent cultural transformation.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed learning something new. That's all for now, but in case you didn't notice, there are a lot more episodes on this subject available right now. If you're enjoying these historical podcasts, please like and subscribe and share with other history buffs.